Want to speak real German from your very first lesson? Get instant access with your free lifetime account at LangAdvance.com.
Welcome to the crash course in German. This is the perfect course if you plan to visit Germany on vacation. This class is only scratching the surface of German and not meant for test preparations of any kind. But it will help you to not feel super overwhelmed when you arrive in Germany. As with all our courses, this is an all-level course that will not require you to know specific vocabulary already. I will explain everything in English and I will translate all examples as well, so no matter your level, you can enjoy and learn in this course. There will be short test questions after each lesson, and I will also repeat the most crucial information to make sure they really stick. At the end, there will be a final exam that will test your newly found knowledge. However, if tests are not your thing, don't worry, you can totally skip that part. But I wanted to give you all the option to test yourself. If you struggle with hearing or understanding me, check out the captions PDF in the resources that allow you to follow everything I say here. I also want to emphasize the resources section especially. There you'll find super helpful PDFs and other information that will help you understand German better. I recommend printing them and keeping them close by as you go along, but you do you. All right, that's enough instruction. Let's get started. Here you can see all the stuff we will cover in this course. We will start with some basics regarding German pronunciation. Then we will do a grammar section where we cover the most important features of German grammar. Keep in mind, this is by no means all the German grammar, but I will give you the most important facts so you can start making sense of the German around you. We will cover you, du versus sie, verbs and conjugation, articles and nouns, cases, sentence structure. Next, we will discuss different aspects of German culture. Here I concentrate on stuff and vocabulary that you might need on your trip. We will discuss small talk, greetings, directions, public transportation, restaurant food, drink, hotels, emergency, and number and time. And lastly, I will talk a bit about cultural differences. Keep in mind, a significant aspect of language is always culture.
So tell me a little bit about yourself.
So I'm Esther and I created Learn German Online. I have been an educator almost all my life. I started in high school and then later on I worked in an NGO where we helped refugees with their tutoring in Germany. I also am a paralegal. I am a lawyer, I'm an attorney. I went to law school in Germany, in the UK, and in the US. So you can see I have been in school almost all my life, and I'm really passionate about education. In these various capacities, I really profited myself from great teachers and have therefore developed a deep passion for educating and helping other people achieve their goals.
What is your teaching experience?
So as I've just said, I have been teaching German almost all my life. I started in high school when I helped younger kids with their German. And then later in this NGO was the first time that I taught German as a second language, which was a great experience. And in law school, I have been teaching various law classes. And then when I moved to the US a couple of years ago, I started teaching German once again as a full-time job. And in the beginning of my career, I mostly educated children, but I have shifted my focus with time to adults because I have a pretty broad knowledge of learning methodology and teaching techniques. I found it a great challenge to help adult learners learn a second language, which is obviously a lot more complicated than for kids learning a new language. And this has been a great challenge.
So, what is your teaching philosophy?
So I have strong opinions on that one. A lot of German classes are full immersion. I do not do full immersion, which means all my classes are entirely in English. You will find a lot of examples, obviously, in German, where I give you some sentences where you can practice your pronunciation, but I myself have never benefited from full immersion. I need to be able to understand the grammatical explanations in my own language. And I found that my students here in the US also prefer to have the grammar explained in their own language. And that's why I do not do full immersion ever. Obviously, the further you get, the more I switch to German, because then you're able to understand it. But in the beginning, I really believe that it is fundamental to not feel overwhelmed and to actually give the student the time to learn a language. I also believe in working continuously, steadily, but not to overdo it. So I always recommend doing a little bit every day, but to not overdo it. I believe that learning a language is more of a marathon than a sprint, and therefore you really want to keep your interest alive. So I believe that when you are an adult and you want to learn a foreign language and you're not working with a deadline because you have to take a test, for example, then you need to keep your interest alive and therefore just do small amounts, but keep doing it.
In your opinion, what's the best way to learn a language?
I believe in working steadily. So you want to do a little bit every day, but don't do too much. There is a lot of practice material that you can find online for free when it comes to German, and there is never a shortage of having the exposure to do something, but you also don't want to do too much. I find that sometimes you find people online telling you that you will be able to learn a language in 3 months or 6 weeks or something like that, pick a date. I don't think that is true for most people. It's definitely not true for me. I myself obviously learned English and I tried to learn Arabic. I gave up on that. And French I'm still struggling with. I know that there are some people that pick up a language fairly quickly, but these people are the exceptions. So for most of us, we really want to do a little bit every day and we want to keep it fun. And therefore, as I've said, my classes are going to be in English because I want you to be able to understand what you're doing. And then what you need to put in is work. It's really about practicing. To not give up, to not get discouraged when you find yourself redoing an exercise 3-4 times and still making mistakes. That's completely normal. So just keep on doing it. Just be patient with yourself. You will find that you understand sentences with time that you were not able to understand in the beginning, and that's going to be the reward. But don't expect, or don't be disappointed, let's put it this way, don't be disappointed if you are not progressing as fast as these people claim on the internet.
So, whom are these classes for?
So my classes are really aimed towards Americans. You will find, as I've said, the classes are in English, but you will find that I'm often referring to American English because English is different wherever you are, and don't underestimate the culture aspect in languages. I know from experience that the American English and the American culture is very different from the British English and the British culture, and language really shows culture. And therefore, when I teach German, I'm always referring back to American culture and language. So therefore, if you happen to be an American, you will find my classes very helpful because I will point out the pitfalls for you when it comes to pronunciation and grammar and obviously speaking. If you're another English speaker, for example, from the UK or Australia or New Zealand, then these classes will also be helpful, but obviously the culture aspect will be different. And if you have learned English as a second language already, Learning German might be actually easier for you than somebody who's learning it as its first language because you already mastered a second language, and English and German has a lot of overlap.
So, how are these classes structured?
So you will find that I have always a lecture part where I talk about the theoretical part and where I give examples. But then I also provide many PDFs with overviews, charts, and stuff that you need to remember. And there is also a lot of exercises. You will find that I have exercise PDFs that you can print and then do the exercises on your own, but I'll also guide you through a lot of the exercises in extra videos. So if you find that you struggle a little bit in the beginning or in the middle or at the end, because it takes time, then you can just listen to the guided exercises and then follow through and then try one more time by yourself. You will also find that I am very German, which means I will be very direct. If you know one thing about Germans, it's that we are very direct. So you will see in my classes that I will tell you if something is difficult. I will not sugarcoat it. I really don't do any sugarcoating. The good part about that is that if I don't say it's difficult, it probably isn't. But if I say something is challenging, then you know it really is. And you don't feel like you're not progressing as fast as you should. So you can always rely on what I say, and you will know if something is going to be hard. And if something is hard, take your time.
So, tell me a little bit about yourself.
So I'm Esther, and I hope I answered all your questions, and I hope you will sign up for the class and we will be able to work together. I'm looking forward to it.
The most important thing you will need to know about German is that every letter you see must be pronounced. And when I say pronounced, I mean pronounced strongly. However, there are some exceptions, which I call special combinations. And then German words are, for the most part, stressed on the first syllable. We also try to pronounce foreign words correctly, which applies to English words and for most French words that are used in German. Here you can see the German alphabet. The good news is that German barely has any different letters than English. In fact, we only have 4 extra letters. What I have done here in this chart is writing down the letters in the left column. In the middle column, I've written down how to pronounce the letter. Be aware, this is how we Germans think these letters are pronounced. On the right side, you will find an example word that uses the letter and sometimes some extra tips that help you figure out the correct pronunciation. A, Apfel, apple. B, Banane, banana. C, Klaus. And for the C, the TS has to be strong, like a snake. C. D, der, die, das, the. E, elephant. And you see I wrote down frog mouth because you want to open your mouth wide like a frog. E. F, Falafel. G, Geduld, patience. You can tell I don't do a J sound. It is always going to be G. H, Hase, rabbit. E, eagle, hedgehog, which is the American E. J, Johanna. K, Kamel, camel. L, lesen, to read. M, Mama, mom. N, nass, wet. O, or, ear. So that one is not an O, it's an O, straight. We continue with P, Post, mail, Q, Qualle, jellyfish, R, Robert, and you can tell that this R is coming from the back of my throat. So it's almost as if you have something stuck there and you're trying to get it out. R. If you cannot get yourself to make this noise, A, you're in good company. A lot of Americans can pronounce it. And then B, if you can roll the R instead. That is something that you can do. In Bavaria, they roll the R. So if that's easier for you, you can just roll the R instead. S, Sand, sand. T, tea. U, uhu. And I like to call this one the monkey noise, because that's the noise a monkey makes. Think Curious George. Or if you speak French, it's the OU sound. V, von, and it's the sound of fan or foul, so an F, yeah, from or off. W, Weg, path, and your teeth have to go on your lip. W. X, mixer, blender. Y, typisch, typical. Z, zebra, and again we have the TS sound. Yeah, so you want to channel your inner snake. Z. Now we are moving on to the unique extra letters that German uses. The first three are called Umlaute. If you need to type them, but you don't use a German keyboard, you can type them also as AE, OE, and UE. The last letter that looks like a funny B is not a B, but an SZ, also called a sharp or strong S. Again, if you don't have a German keyboard available, you can type it as a double S. We will not use SS for hopefully obvious historical reasons. Now let me pronounce them for you. Ärger, anger. Or if you speak French, think of the pronunciation of merde. Or, according to my spouse, you can also think of a Canadian saying eh. Ökonom, economist. To me, this letter sounds like many sounds spoken by a French person. French U. Übung, exercise. You are likely not hearing a difference between the Ö and the Ü. For the Ü, the second one, the mouth has to be more tense. So it's both a round shape, but the Ü, the second one, the mouth has to be stronger. The muscles are more tense. SZ, Straße, street. As I said before, this is simply a very strong S. If you don't hear any difference between the Ö and the Ü, don't be concerned. Hearing this difference takes a long time, at least for most of my students. And lastly, we must talk about the special combinations. These special combinations are the only time not every letter is pronounced as is. These special combinations have their own sound, so whenever you see them, don't look at them individually, but at their pronunciation as a team. Ow is pretty straightforward. It's the sound you make when you hurt yourself. PH is a bit trickier because sometimes it is pronounced as an F and sometimes letter by letter as PH. So either it has a sound of photo or PH-Wert. In addition, the H can be silent too. The next two combinations are pronounced the same despite their different spellings. Both are pronounced oi, like Eule, owl. CH is a very mean combination and probably the hardest in the German language. Here we have 3 different pronunciations. We can either pronounce it soft, like in ich, I, or it can be a throaty noise, like in auch, also. It can even be a k, like in Wachs, wax. Now you might ask, when do I know which of these 3 pronunciations I'm dealing with? That's a very good question with a very dissatisfying answer. You don't know if you haven't memorized it. So you need to memorize the pronunciation of each word carefully. The next one is easier, s, as in tsunami. You only want to make sure it's a sharp, snaky noise. The ng is the same noise you'll use in going, Be aware though that it is never a j sound that is so common in English. I like to call the following combination train noise, because that's how it sounds. Sh. An example would be Schule, school. Keep in mind that it is a soft noise. The C is consumed by the team. The following 2 combinations have something in common. They both have 2 different ways to pronounce them. They are either a special combination or are pronounced letter by letter. For both, the same rule of thumb applies. If they are at the beginning of a word, even as part of a compound, they are pronounced as the special combination, and if they are in the middle or end of a word, they are letter by letter. Again, this is only a rule of thumb and not 100%, but I think your odds are about 80% if you follow this rule. Next, we have st. We either pronounce it as a train noise plus t or letter by letter. It's either Strudel, a super tasty cakeish dish, or ist, to be. SP follows the same logic. It is either train noise plus P or letter by letter. We have either Spatz, sparrow, or lispeln, to lisp. Next, we have 2 combinations that are somewhat of a challenge for English speakers, but they don't have to be. There are some words in English where you use the correct quote-unquote pronunciation, i.e. the German pronunciation. First, we have EI or AI. Both are pronounced like the English letter I. Here, your guiding word can be Geico, since English uses the quote-unquote correct pronunciation. The second special combination is IE, the opposite, which is pronounced differently. It is pronounced like the English E. Please think of diese. For both combinations, you can also concentrate on the second letter of the combinations. This letter, if pronounced English, gives you the correct pronunciation. Next, we have CK, which is pronounced like a very strong K, Glück, luck. For the last one, the PF, I like to quote my spouse, who says it sounds like beatboxing. My students always agree with that, so I hope this works for you. German has 6 different types of verbs. I like to call them verb families. We have regular verbs, irregular verbs, mixed verbs, separable verbs, inseparable verbs, modal verbs. Since this is only a crash course, we will only talk about regular verbs and pretend the other verbs don't exist. However, when you are in Germany and see a verb that does not follow the pattern, I'll explain in a second, it probably belongs to one of the other verb families. Let's start with some of the basics. Conjugation is the adjustment of a verb according to the person who acts. English conjugation is very simple for the most part because you use mostly the same conjugation except for the third person singular, he, she, it. You can see here that it doesn't make a difference if I go or we go. The verb go is always the same. Only if she goes, the verb adds an es. That is conjugation. German conjugates every person differently, which you can see here on the right side. Therefore, the verb adds different endings according to who goes. Ich gehe, du gehst, er, sie, es geht, wir gehen, ihr geht, sie gehen. Let me read that one more time. Ich gehe, du gehst, er, sie, es geht, wir gehen, ihr geht, sie gehen. As you can see here, we have 4 different you in German. 2 in the singular and 2 in the plural. The difference between the 2 is that one is formal and one is informal. Germany has a very formal culture, so whenever you speak to adults that you are neither friends with, are classmates, or are related to, you want to be formal. Formal means using the formal you and the last name of the person. Here you can see that in the singular, we have the informal du that is conjugated second person singular, and the formal sie, which is capitalized, super important, and is conjugated third person plural. I know this is a bit confusing, but practice makes perfect in this instance. In the plural, we also have 2 you. The informal ihr, conjugated second person plural, and the formal sie, again capitalized and conjugated third person plural. If you wonder when to use the formal plural sie, think of a situation where you give a speech, presentation, or something like that to a group of people in work context. There you would address the crowd, but you have to do so in a formal way and therefore would use sie. The next topic is the infamous Verbklammer, or verb parentheses, or verb sandwich. That is what I like to call it. It is an essential feature of the German language that frustrates many a German learner because it makes it very hard to grasp the meaning of a sentence. When I introduce this concept, I always like to quote Mark Twain with the following statement. The Germans have an inhuman way of cutting up their verbs. Now, a verb has a hard enough time, enough of it in this world when it's all together. It's downright inhuman to split it up. But that's just what those Germans do. They take part of a verb and put it down here like a steak, and they take the other part of it and put it away over yonder like another steak, and between these two limits, they just shovel in German. I think he sums it up nicely. The verb Klammer is precisely that. We separate the verbs, or sometimes even the same verb, and put one in the second position and the other as the last word of the sentence. I'm not entirely sure why we do that, but I believe it keeps the listener's attention until the end. This verb sandwich construction forces the listener to pay close attention until the sentence is finished, since the second verb will give crucial information about the sentence content. The second verb, or the verbs in the end position, there can be more than one, is the main verb, the verb that describes the actual action of the sentence, whereas the second position is reserved for helping verbs that show mostly either inclination or tense. Let me give you some facts about the verb sandwich. The verb Klammer is used whenever a sentence uses more than one verb. If it is used, one verb goes in the second position and is conjugated. The other verb or verbs are in the last position in the sentence and are in the infinitive or the past participle form if the tense requires it. Side note, if you want to know more about those topics, check out our verb and tenses course. The second position verb is the helping verb. Helping verbs can indicate inclination, Modalverben, or tense, or add to the verb. Spazieren, gehen, to go on a walk. If you are dealing with a separable verb, and the separable verb is the only verb in the sentence, it is treated as if it's two verbs, and you have to split it and put the prefix in the second position and the quote-unquote main verb part at the end of the sentence. Following, I will explain further where a verb goes. Let us quickly remember our main rule. The verb goes in the second position, and if you have more than one verb, the other or others are in the last position. I came up with a few examples, and you can see how the verb is always in the second position, no matter what. The biggest challenge for English speakers is that you want to have your subject come before the verb. This rule does not apply to German. In German, the subject only precedes the verb if you start the sentence with it. If not, the verb goes in the second position and the subject is somewhere else in the sentence. If you have taken my cases class already, you know that the subject can be placed wherever. The verb, however, needs to be in the second position. Let's look at some examples. Ich komme heute. I come today. Heute komme ich. Today I come. Ich komme heute vorbei. I come by today. Heute komme ich vorbei. Today I come by. Ich möchte heute vorbeikommen. I would like to come by today. And you can see how the verb remains in the second position no matter what. Let's summarize. If there is only one verb, that verb is in the second position and conjugated. Now what happens if an auxiliary verb is used? The auxiliary verb will be put in the second position and conjugated, and the main verb will be placed at the end of the sentence and will be in the infinitive. This also applies to separable verbs that are separated if they are the only verb in the sentence. Auxiliary verbs can be a tense verb, priority 1, a modal verb, priority 2, another auxiliary verb, priority 3. You will see in a second what I mean by the priorities. For now, I recommend you copy that on an extra sheet of paper, and when you're ready, let's move on. This is supposed to be a flowchart, but it looks wild, I know. You better believe that during bar prep, my walls were full of the craziest flowcharts. I will give you a couple of quiet seconds to get an idea of this overview. The sentences are a variation of I want to go swimming today and the perfect of that. Okay, I hope this was enough time. If not, stop the video and resume when you're ready to dive in. As I've said, I have given you different versions of the same sentence to demonstrate where verbs go when you add additional elements. The first sentence is the default, and this default is your baseline. The sentence is the one that you will use as a comparison and orient yourself when you are faced with multiple verbs and lots of confusion. The sentence translates to I swim today. Then we have I go swimming today. The following sentence is I want to swim today. Then we have I want to go swimming today. Then I have been swimming today. I was swimming today. The following sentence translates to I have been going swimming today, or I went to go swimming today. And the last one is I have wanted to go swimming today. Okay, this is a lot, I know. You can see that I numbered the words, and you know that the verb has to be in a second position. If we have more than one verb, I used letters. Therefore, we will be dealing with a 2A, 2B, 2C, and even one 2D. I also use colors. The infinitive in the last position is yellow. The priority 3 last position auxiliary verbs are purple, and the priority 2 last position auxiliary verbs are blue. Okay, so now let's look at what is happening here. I told you the first sentence is the default, which means the verb is in the second position. We only have one verb, and the verb is conjugated according to the subject. Now what happens if we put in an auxiliary verb? Then the auxiliary verb takes the second position and forces the main verb to the end in the infinitive. And that is exactly what happens in sentence number 2. We add the auxiliary verb gehen. Therefore, the main verb schwimmen is forced to the last position in the infinitive. Now you know that there is a difference between the auxiliary verbs, and not all auxiliary verbs are the same. They have different priorities. We have priority number 1, most important, priority number 2, medium important, and priority number 3, not important. And according to their priority levels, they will take the second position or be forced to the end if a more important auxiliary verb is part of a sentence. Kind of a run-down-the-mill rich person situation. I hear that there is a hacking order even within the rich people community, and whoever is the richest dominates the poorer of the rich. I hope I do not trigger anyone with these examples. I'm only trying to make this as pictorial as possible, to make it as easy on your brain as possible. So let's run with this rich people scenario for now. The second sentence has a priority 3 helping verb. However, there is no other helping verb in the sentence, and therefore the gehen takes the popular second position. Same in the next sentence. Ich will heute schwimmen. Here we have an auxiliary verb as well. However, it's the only auxiliary verb, so we don't need to worry about the verb order. However, In number 3, we are confronted with this problem of order. Ich will heute schwimmen gehen. Here we have a priority 2 as well as a priority 3 auxiliary verb, and we have to determine which one goes where. We know that the main verb is in the last position because we compare it to the default. Ich schwimme heute. So we know that the schwimmen has to come after heute. But which of the auxiliary verbs goes in the popular second and which in the last position? This is where the priorities matter. A priority 2 verb is a rich person than a priority 3 verb, and therefore it will take the second position and force the other auxiliary verb into the last position. Now the following sentence is a perfect tense sentence. We want to keep in mind that for the perfect, the infinitive, quote unquote, is not the actual infinitive to swim, but the quote unquote past participle swam, which is why I call it the perfect infinitive. Careful, perfect infinitive is not a proper grammatical term. I just made it up. I'm just trying to give you as much symmetry as possible to see how the rules are applied consistently. You can see that this perfect tense sentence works the same. We have an auxiliary verb in the second position and the infinitive of to swim at the end, and because it's a perfect tense sentence, it's the quote-unquote perfect infinitive geschwommen. The next sentence mirrors the rule applied in sentence 3. Priority 1, bin, trumps priority 3, gegangen. Now, the last sentence puts the cherry on top. I will be candid with you. This is not a sentence that I use a lot. I might have said it at some point in my life, but we're probably talking about a maximum of 5 times in my entire life. However, we want to understand how to do this, and therefore I put the sentence in. Here we have a total of 4 verbs. That is a lot of verbs. We have 1 quote-unquote main verb and 3 auxiliary verbs. Now you can see why it is so crucial to know your priorities. You need to know which of these auxiliary verbs is a priority 1, which is a priority 2, and which is a priority 3, because that will be the order in which you place them into the sentence. Priority 1 will take the second position and will be conjugated. Priority 2 will take the last position and will be in the infinitive, same as the quote-unquote main verb. And priority 3 will take the last position and will also be in the infinitive. This construction is something that we already covered in the perfect section. It's the quote-unquote double infinitive construction. Here, however, it's a triple infinitive construction. Isn't German fun? And that is it. I recommend you print this and meditate over it a lot. This will take time until it makes sense. And as always, repetition is vital. In the next part, I will concentrate on the position of verbs in a German sentence. There is one very important rule. The verb has to be in the second position. And if there is more than one verb, one goes in the second position, the other at the end. That's it. Obviously, there are some exceptions to this very important rule, but I promise you there are very few exceptions. So if you only take away one thing from this class, I do hope though you take away more than that. Let it be verb second position. The very few exceptions mentioned are the following 3. Yes/no questions, imperative, dependent clauses. I will go through these next. The next topic is nouns. If you thought verbs and their position was tricky, let me tell you, you have nothing seen yet. First of all, German uses 3 genders for nouns. Whereas in English everything is the, German uses 3 articles. Der, masculine, die, feminine, and das, neuter. Therefore, all the words have a gender, not just men and women. For example, a German tree is masculine, a German street is feminine, and a German child, no matter the gender, is neuter. There are some rules as to when a word has a specific gender. They have to do with prefixes, origin, and other things. You can also buy big books that quote-unquote explain why certain nouns have a specific gender. I recommend a different approach. Accept the gender, memorize it, and don't waste time figuring out why they have a certain gender. My students have fared far better with the acceptance approach so far. Another fun fact about German nouns is that they always need to be capitalized. All nouns, always. Another thing you need to know about nouns is that their plurals are also headache-inducing. Again, some rules explain why a noun receives a particular plural, but there are many exceptions to these rules, so I, again, recommend simply accept the plural of a noun and quote-unquote simply memorize it. Here you can see how many different plurals German uses. Der Lehrer, die Lehrer, male teacher. Die Mutter, die Mütter, mother. Der Tisch, die Tische, table. Der Stuhl, die Stühle, chair. Das Kind, die Kinder, child. Das Buch, die Bücher, book. Die Frau, die Frauen, woman. Die Straße, die Straßen, street. Das Büro, die Büros, office. The last thing about nouns, and probably the most challenging thing about German, is something that is called cases. I will explain what that is next. Be forewarned though, cases are hard. You might have seen that we offer a 12-hour course just about cases. That tells you how tricky they are and that there is a lot to know about them. However, the cases are at the foundation of German, so I cannot entirely skip them.
Let's start by looking at the reason why we are using cases and what are cases in the first place. I'm sure you have been struggling with the cases and that is why you are here. And you might know a little bit about them, but maybe you have absolutely no clue about cases either. And wherever you are, I will meet you there and shed some light on it. Some languages use cases, and German is one of them. But other languages don't use cases at all. English, for example, doesn't. French, for example, doesn't. But then there are also languages that use a lot more cases than German does. We use 4 cases, nominative, accusative, dative, and genitive. But Hungarian, for example, according to Google, uses more than 10 cases. So you can see, German is not the hardest language when it comes to cases. But 4 cases are already quite challenging, and that is why we're here. Let's get started. What do cases do? Cases show the relationship between all the nouns in a sentence. They explain to you who owns or influences whom, or who is owned or influenced by whom. In English, that is made clear by the position of the words. What English does is, it has a very basic rule, and that rule is, the subject comes first, then follows the direct object, then follows the indirect object. What that means is that whatever noun comes first in the sentence, that has to be the subject. You will automatically understand that the first noun is the quote-unquote hero of the story, the subject. And German does need cases because we do not follow this fundamental English rule. English also uses prepositions to indicate the indirect object. And again, that makes it clear to you that this is, in fact, the indirect object. The downside of that English rule is that it is very inflexible, right? You cannot really put the subject in the middle of the sentence or at the end of the sentence. And that is what German wants to do. We Germans, or whoever came up with that system, we wanted maximum flexibility. We do not want to be put into this very strong corset of the subject has to come first. We do want to be able to put the subject in the middle of the sentence or at the end of the sentence. To summarize, and I've also written that down, in German, the subject does not have to be at the beginning of the sentence, but can be anywhere in the sentence. And that means that if you want to be able to understand all the relationships between the nouns in a sentence, it is necessary to show these relationships otherwise. And that is where the cases come in, and that is where the difficulties come in. You can see that demonstrated in these sentences. First off, these 4 sentences all mean the same thing in English. All of these translate to, she gives the money to her daughter. However, you can see that the word order is very, very different. I have marked nominative, the subject, blue, so you will be able to see where the subject is in every single sentence. On the left side, you see the German sentences, and on the right side, you see the English translations. I didn't translate it quite literally. I tried to make it as literal as possible while it is still understandable. And what you see here is that in English, the only way to say this is, she gives the money to her daughter. So she is the subject, the nominative. The money is what we are giving. This is going to be the direct object. In German, that is the case of the accusative. And then the to her daughter is the indirect object in the last position. And as promised, you have a preposition indicating that as well, the to. So that is the only way you can say it in English. German, however, really allows you to play around and to say it in different ways. So you can say, sie gibt ihrer Tochter das Geld. She gives to her daughter the money. You can also say, sie gibt das Geld ihrer Tochter. She gives the money to her daughter. You can also say, das Geld gibt sie ihrer Tochter. The money she gives to her daughter. Or you can say, ihrer Tochter gibt sie das Geld. To her daughter, she gives the money. All of these 4 sentences are correct. Now you might wonder, okay, maybe they are all correct, but is there one that you guys prefer? And the general answer is no. You should be able to diversify your sentences in any way you want, and you really should be able to play around. This said, we do tend to put the subject first as well. So I would say that we probably use the first or the second sentence mostly.
Now we will look at German sentences. German uses a wide variety of sentence structures, many more than English does. And why is that? It always comes back to flexibility. A well-spoken German uses many different words, cases, and sentence structures. Here you can see all the different types of sentences German has to offer. Independent clause, I live here, ich wohne hier. W question, where do you live? Wo wohnst du? Yes/no question, do you live here? Wohnst du hier? Imperative, live here. Wohne hier, wohnt hier, wohnen Sie hier. Subordinate clause, I live here because Berlin is so beautiful. Ich wohne hier, weil Berlin so schön ist. Weil Berlin so schön ist, wohne ich hier. Infinitive clause with zu, it is nice to live in Berlin. Es ist schön, in Berlin zu wohnen. Relative clause, I live in the beautiful Berlin, which is the capital of Germany. Ich wohne in dem schönen Berlin, das die Hauptstadt Deutschlands ist. Obviously, I don't expect you to learn and use these, but you can see here why learning German takes so much time. If the same thing can be said in so many different ways, it is challenging to learn quote-unquote enough German in a short amount of time to be prepared for every eventuality. All right, questions. First off, there are two types of questions, and they are the same in German as they are in English. German, however, does take the difference more seriously than American English does. The first type is W questions, and the second, yes or no questions. I will first talk about the grammar and afterward about the usage. W question word questions follow the ironclad rule: the verb has to be in the second position. They are called W question word questions because they all start with a W. Duh, I know. But it never hurts to spell it out to make sure everyone is on the same page. Some of these words are wer, wann, warum, woher, wo, was. And an example sentence is wann kommst du? When are you coming? And you can see that the verb is in the second position indeed. Now, yes-no questions are rebels. They do not follow this rule. Here the verb is at the beginning of the sentence. Let me tell you right away, this is the same as in English. However, because German only has one present tense, the I go present tense, and not the I do go and the I am going present tense, German does not use an auxiliary verb, and the main verb starts the sentence off. Little footnote, if you have questions about the tenses, check out our tense class. Let's see this in action. Kommst du heute? Are you coming today? And you can see in English and German the verb comes first. That is a grammar part. Now let's talk about the usage. And again, this is a verb class. If you're interested in sentence structure, check out the sentence structure class. But what I will tell you here is that we take the difference very seriously. Meaning, if a German asks you a yes/no question, your answer must include a yes or a no or an I don't know. If you must, you can add a tiny bit of information or repeat the question after saying yes, no, I don't know. But please do not do the following. Question: do you like pizza? Answer: well, you see, usually I do not eat on Mondays, but today I did a lot of work, the sun was shining, so I thought maybe I could blah blah blah. This is the safest way to piss off a German. And you might get interrupted, and a German might repeat their question and might also say something like, that's not what I asked. And even if that sounds rude to you in the context of German, you are the rude one if you refuse to answer a simple yes/no question with yes or no, and or volunteer information that you were not asked for. On the other hand, a W question word question is supposed to result in information giving. So again, if a German asks you, and trust me, they rarely do, how are you? Wie geht es Ihnen? They really want to hear how you do. So if you say, I'm fine, they might answer, okay, don't tell me then. Okay? So, yes/no question equals yes/no answer. W question equals volunteering substantial information. Now let's talk about statements. As I've shown you earlier, you can phrase a statement either as an independent clause or as an independent and dependent clause. There are many dependent clauses, most of them called subordinate clauses. We will only talk about the very basics of that construction and leave the details for another course. Firstly, we will discuss the independent sentence. Here, the verb must be in the second position. Everything else is flexible. Die Mutter gibt der Tochter das Geld. Der Tochter gibt die Mutter das Geld. Das Geld gibt die Mutter der Tochter. Das Geld gibt der Tochter die Mutter. Each of these sentences translates to the mother gives money to the daughter, because the English sentence structure is much more rigid and doesn't allow for the same flexibility as German. Now, in a subordinate clause, the verb is at the end, and we are using a subordinating conjunction. This kind of sentence structure is completely foreign to English. Die Mutter gibt der Tochter das Geld, weil sie sich ein Eis kaufen möchte. The mother gives money to the daughter because she wants to buy an ice cream. In the
Vocab
next
list,
segment,
Hotels.
we will dive into
Nouns.
German culture.
Die Klimaanlage, der Balkon, das Badezimmer, das Frühstück, die Butter, das Ladekabel, der Käse, der Kaffee, die Cola, die Sahne, die Tasse, die Schorle, das Abendessen, das Doppelbett, das Getränk, der Fahrstuhl, der Fisch, die Etage, das Stockwerk, das Essen, die Gabel, der Obstsaft, das Glas, der Föhn, der Schinken, die Heizung, der Honig, das Eis, die Marmelade, das Messer, die Limonade, der Lichtschalter, das Mittagessen, das Fleisch, das Menü, die Speisekarte, die Milch, die Hafermilch, die Pizza, der Teller, die Steckdose, das Restaurant, das Doppelzimmer, die Zimmernummer, der Salat, das Salz, die Dusche, das Einzelbett, das Einzelzimmer, die Suppe, die Soja, das Soja, die Sojamilch, der Löffel, die Übernachtung, die Halbpension, die Vollpension, das Steak, der Zucker, der Tee, die Badewanne, der Weckanruf, das Wasser, das Fenster, der Wein. Deutsch, scharf, mild, nicht scharf, blutig, roh, salzig, süß, zart, vegan, vegetarisch, barrierefrei. Verbs: backen, satt sein, Hunger haben, Durst haben, trinken, frühstücken, essen, bestellen, bezahlen, reservieren. Sentences. Zimmer mit Ausblick. Bringen Sie mir bitte das Menü. Bringen Sie mir bitte die Weinkarte. Kann ich Ihnen helfen? Darf ich Ihnen helfen? Was kann ich für Sie tun? Können Sie mir helfen? Ich benötige noch Ihren Ausweis oder Reisepass. Können Sie mir bitte Ihren Ausweis oder Reisepass zeigen? Können Sie mich um 8 Uhr wecken? Haben Sie ein Doppelzimmer? Haben Sie einen Safe? Haben Sie noch ein Zimmer frei? Haben Sie? Sprechen Sie Englisch? Ich wünsche Ihnen einen angenehmen Aufenthalt. Wie viel kostet das? Ich möchte auschecken. Ich möchte gern ein Nichtraucherzimmer reservieren. Ich möchte gern ein Raucherzimmer reservieren. Ich möchte gern ein Zimmer mit Badewanne reservieren. Ich möchte gern ein Zimmer mit Dusche reservieren. Ich möchte gern bestellen. Ich würde gerne bestellen. Ich möchte gerne bezahlen. Bitte bringen Sie die Rechnung. Ich bin allergisch gegen. Ich bleibe eine Nacht. Ich bleibe 2 Nächte. Ich nehme es. Ist das Zimmer barrierefrei? Vielen Dank, danke. Einen Tisch für 2 reservieren. nach hinten, nach vorne. Was bedeutet das? Was ist das? Wo ist das WC? Wo sind die Toiletten? Zahlen Sie bar oder mit Kreditkarte? Vocab List, Restaurant, Food, Drink. Nouns. Der Apfel, die Mandelmilch, die Banane, die Bäckerei, die Bohne, das Bier, die Beeren, das Brot, das Brötchen, das Frühstück, die Butter, der Kuchen, die Karotten, die Möhren, der Käse, das Hähnchen, der Kaffee, die Cola, das Gewürz, die Sahne, die Tasse, die Schorle, das Abendessen, das Getränk, die Eier, der Markt, der Fisch, das Mehl, das Essen, die Gabel, die Pommes, die Frucht, der Obstsaft, der Knoblauch, das Glas, die Traube, der Schinken, die Kräuter, der Honig, das Eis, die Marmelade, das Messer, das Mittagessen, das Menü, die Speisekarte, das Fleisch, die Milch, der Becher, die Nuss, die Hafermilch, die Zwiebel, die Orange, die Erbse, der Pfeffer, die Pizza, der Teller, die Kartoffel, die Kartoffeln, die Himbeere, das Restaurant, das WC, die Toiletten, Damen-WC, Herren-WC, der Reis, der Salat, das Salz, die Soße, die Wurst, die Soja, das Soja, die Sojamilch, die Suppe, der Löffel, das Steak, die Erdbeere, der Zucker, der Supermarkt, der Tee, die Tomate, das Gemüse, das Wasser, der Wein. Adjectives, Adverbs, amerikanisch, asiatisch, bitter, französisch, deutsch, scharf, indisch, italienisch, mexikanisch, mild, nicht scharf, roh, blutig, salzig, süß, thailändisch, zart, vegan, vegetarisch, barrierefrei. Verbs. Trinken, essen, frühstücken, kochen, braten, backen, spülen, riechen, Hunger haben, Durst haben, den Tisch decken, satt sein, bestellen. Sentences. Einen Tisch für 2 reservieren. Ich möchte gerne bezahlen, bitte bringen Sie die Rechnung. Ich möchte gerne bestellen, ich würde gerne bestellen. Vielen Dank. Danke. Haben Sie? Was bedeutet das? Sprechen Sie Englisch? Wo ist das WC? Wo sind die Toiletten? Was ist das? Bringen Sie mir bitte das Menü, bringen Sie mir bitte die Weinkarte. Wo können wir uns hinsetzen? Wie viel kostet das? Ich bin allergisch gegen. Können Sie mir helfen?
Do not sit at a table with a reserviert sign, but all other tables are up for grabs. Also, you can occupy a table as long as you want. There is never a rush to leave in a German restaurant. Therefore, you must request a check. It would be impolite for the waiter or waitress just to bring you the bill unasked. If, in rare occasions, waiters or waitresses change shifts and they ask you to pay, they will add that you shouldn't feel obliged to leave by no means. And they mean that. Feel free to occupy the seat as long as you want. Germans will too. I will later talk more about waiters and waitresses and service in German restaurants. When it comes to tipping, we usually, quote-unquote, round up. I do not want to prevent you from tipping your usual 20%, but you should know that it is not expected. If you receive a bill of 19.50 euros, leaving a 20 euro bill is okay. We deem a tip something additional that rewards good or punishes bad service. If you have a bill higher than 90 euros, I would consider leaving a more substantial tip of at least 10 to 20 euros according to the amount. I have experienced that some waiters and waitresses are cheeky and don't give you back your return money to tip themselves. So it might be a good idea to check your change. It doesn't happen often though. On this note, you probably noticed how I talked about cash. That is intentional. We pay primarily with cash. Everywhere. Debit cards are more and more accepted. Often American debit cards don't work though, and credit cards are rarely accepted. Therefore, you want to make sure you have cash on you when you enter a restaurant or any other place for that matter. Speaking on the topic of money, you also want to know that if you are eating with a group of people, usually everybody only pays for their own food. We don't split the bill evenly. If a German, quote-unquote, lends you money to pay for your share, they very likely expect you to pay them back down to the cent. Another fun fact about restaurants is that if the restaurant is full, other guests might ask you to either share your table or take your chairs, and that is normal. Now let's talk about some essential differences in the restaurant culture. First of all, we Germans don't do free refills. Also, when we use the term Wasser, water, we usually mean sparkling water. If you want quote-unquote normal water, ask for stilles Wasser. Finally, be aware that the water you order costs money. Although you are allowed to request free tap water, my experience is that the waiter or waitress will shame you for it in ways that you'll never dare to order tap water again. A fun fact for most is that beer is usually cheaper than soft drinks. Most visitors love that. I don't drink alcohol and always hated that I had to pay more for my meagerly soft drink than alcohol drinkers. You also want to be aware that we don't usually put ice in our drinks. They are cold, but not iced. If you want ice, you need to ask for it. And some of my students told me that restaurants often don't have ice at all. So you want to take that in consideration. It often takes longish until the waiter or waitress comes to your table to take your order. If that happens, check if you have closed your menu. If your menu isn't closed, they usually assume you're still reviewing it. However, even if your menu is closed, it might take long until they come to you. And that is not surprising because service in Germany is often lacking. And since I promised you a couple of remarks on the topic of service, let's get to it. We Germans call Germany a Servicewüste, a service desert. While we, of course, have amazing waiters and waitresses, the quality of service leaves room to improve, especially in comparison to American service. Don't expect fast and friendly service, and being consistent with what I've told you earlier, small talk rarely makes an appearance. Sometimes you get asked how you like your food, but often you don't. Again, all of this depends on the restaurant. The more touristy a place is, the more likely you'll get better service, but my advice is to expect little and rather be surprised than disappointed. In my 32 years of living in Germany, I only complained about the quality of food once, and only because the pasta I was served was raw, not al dente, debatably crunchy, but plain old undercooked. When I very politely asked the waiter if they could cook them, the restaurant owner came out and gave me a long lecture about Germans always wanting their pasta mushy. Again, he never tried the pasta, and again, they were raw, completely uncooked. That was the only time I've ever complained about the food, and trust me, I will never again. That tells you something about service in Germany. If you leave food on the plate, your plate is probably not going to be taken away. So if you're done but you didn't finish your meal, you might have to verbalize your need to either get the bill or order something else. If you eat in a group, you might want to know that we usually wait until everyone has their food before we start eating. However, if your fellow guests tell you, "Fang ruhig schon an," feel free to start your meal. A little side note for Americans: generally speaking, Germans talk more quietly than Americans, and Americans often are detected as such because they talk very loudly, especially in restaurants. Germans consider it rude to speak loudly, and that way disturb other people's conversations. And lastly, sometimes you'll need to pay for the use of restrooms, 50 cents to €1, even if you're a guest. Therefore, it might be a good idea to come prepared when you go to the restrooms. And here we have another sample conversation. Hallo, ich würde gerne einen Tisch für 2 reservieren. Sehr gerne. Wann möchten Sie kommen? Heute um 19 Uhr. Auf welchen Namen bitte? Smith. S-M-I-T-H. Vielen Dank, bis heute Abend. Wiederhören. Hallo, hier ist die Speisekarte. Wissen Sie schon, was Sie wollen? Ja, ich hätte gern die Nummer 11, die Pizza Margarita und eine Cola. Hier bitte. Vielen Dank. Hat es Ihnen geschmeckt? Darf es noch was sein? Nein, danke. Ich hätte gern die Rechnung. Das macht 10,35 €. Stimmt so. Vielen Dank. Schönen Tag noch. Ihnen auch. For this section, you'll also find a vocabulary list in the resources section, as well as a recording of the vocabulary. First off, in Germany, you can book rooms as Halb- or Vollpension. Halbpension includes breakfast, and Vollpension includes breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Which drinks are included depends on the hotel. You also want to be aware that in German hotels you pay per person, not room. The prices that are displayed must be paid by every person that stays in the room. Sometimes children can stay in a room for free. Unfortunately, many hotels are not wheelchair accessible. To be honest, many places in Germany, including public transportation, are not wheelchair accessible. Often hotels do not even have elevators. My students also told me that they were surprised about the small size of the rooms in Germany. Now let's talk about beds. If you book a Doppelzimmer, you might expect a queen or king size bed. However, you might find that the room has 2 single beds. And even if the hotel room only has 1 bed, most of the time you will find that it uses 2 separate mattresses and separate blankets. Now let's practice the vocabulary. Guten Tag. Ich habe ein Zimmer reserviert und mein Name ist Müller. Guten Tag, Herr Müller. Haben Sie ein Zimmer frei? Haben Sie ein Einzelzimmer? Haben Sie ein Doppelzimmer? Ja, wir haben ein freies Einzelzimmer. Wie viel kostet das Zimmer pro Nacht? Es kostet 100 € pro Nacht. Um wie viel Uhr gibt es Frühstück? Sie können von 7 bis 10 Uhr frühstücken. Wo ist das Zimmer? Sie finden das Zimmer im 3. Stock. Sie können den Fahrstuhl nehmen. Ich wünsche Ihnen einen angenehmen Aufenthalt. Vielen Dank. I also wanted to give you some crucial telephone numbers in case of emergency. First, police, die Polizei. And the telephone number is 110. You can reach the fire department, die Feuerwehr, under 112. The same number also notifies the ambulance, die Ambulanz. If you need to go to a hospital, das Krankenhaus, you can search for the closest one here. And if you need to go to the ER, you will need to ask for die Notaufnahme. Pharmacies are called Apotheke. However, in Germany, most medicine is not over the counter. Many pills that you can get in a CVS in the US, you cannot get in their German equivalent, die Drogerie, but only in a pharmacy, and for many pills, you will need a prescription. If you find yourself in a mental crisis while being in Germany, you can always call or chat with the free crisis line, Telefonseelsorge, 0800 111 0111, or chat using that homepage. Next, we will talk about numbers. Since this is a crash course, I won't get into too much detail about numbers. However, please take a moment to take in the colors. They do help you make sense of the pattern of numbers. You will see that German numbers are almost the same as English numbers, with one big difference. Whereas you say 41, reading the number from left to right, we say it the other way around, like Old English. 41, 1 and 40. We also write numbers with a lower key, and all the words are always one word. Alright, let's read the numbers. 0, 1. The S here is a bit tricky. I always like to say it's a bit narcissistic. It only shows up if there is no other letter coming after and it gets to shine. If there is another letter coming after the S, it's pouty and disappears. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The S is a bit tricky too, which we will get back to at 16. 7. The same goes for the EN, which we'll get back to at 17. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. As I've mentioned before, this number is somewhat unique. You can see that the base number is 6 with an S at the end. But here you can see that the S disappeared. The reason for that is that we Germans don't like too many S sounds in a row. And if you wouldn't get rid of the S, you would have an SZ combination, and that is not pronounceable in German. So therefore, we simply get rid of it. 17. The next number has a surprising change to a 2. Instead of saying 17, we say 17. I'll be honest, I don't have a good explanation for this change other than balance. We also like balance. And you can see how all the other T numbers only have 2 syllables. 13, 14, 15, 16, and then 17. That doesn't sound right. Therefore, we simply shorten it to a 2-syllable word. By the way, the same goes for the TY numbers. 18, 19. 20. Here you can see that as in English, we don't use the base number 2, 2, but a slightly twisted version of it, 20. 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. And you can see how the S is back since there is no accumulation of S sounds. 27, same here. These words are long anyway, no need for making sure they are balanced, so the EN is back. 28, 29, 30. Now that we have entered the 30s, there is another change. only for the 30s. You see that the suffix is not spelled with a Z, but instead with a SZ, which is also pronounced slightly differently. 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59. You might have heard that I vary between 50 and 50. Both is accepted in different parts of Germany. 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99. Okay, but what about numbers above 99, 99? 100 is 100. 200 is 200. 1000 is 1000. I'm sure you noticed that there is a period where you would expect a comma. That's not a mistake, but intentional. German uses a comma where you use a period and vice versa. 2000 is 2000. And now the tricky numbers. 357 is basically pronounced 300 plus 7 plus 50. 357. 10,000 is 10,000. 20,000 is 20,000. 3,764 is pronounced 3,000 plus 700 plus 4 plus 60. 3,764. 100,000 is 100,000. 200,000 is 200,000. 1 million is eine Million. Here we have two words, and Million is a noun and therefore capitalized. 0.59 is 0,59. Everything after the comma is number by number, and everything is separate words. And comma is a noun and therefore capitalized. Prices, however, don't follow this logic. They are pronounced 12,95 €. In our last segment, we will be discussing cultural differences. Firstly, I want to discuss swearing. Whereas public cursing is often considered rude in the US, Germans are very comfortable cursing wherever we are, which includes cursing in front of children. We believe that if you as a parent don't want your children to be surrounded by cursing, it is your job to make sure they don't swear, but it's not up to the people around you to limit themselves. However, when it comes to jaywalking, we take the opposite stance. First, jaywalking is very frowned upon in Germany altogether. Second, if you jaywalk in front of a child, you better be prepared to get cursed out by everybody around you. There is some logic behind it. Children have a hard time judging the speed of a car correctly. Therefore, if they think jaywalking is okay because you do it, they might do that without their parents around and get hit by a bus, whereas cursing does not harm your child. Secondly, I want to talk a bit about public behavior in general. I'd say that differences between Americans and Germans are the strongest when it comes to public behavior. First of all, Germans keep a lot of eye contact when they speak with someone, but also when walking past someone in the streets or in public transportation. We mean no offense by it. Even though it might be offensive to you, it is just what we do. On that note, we also keep less distance between people. That might change in the future due to the COVID years, but generally speaking, a German doesn't need as much personal space as an American. Something else that is very different in Germany is our attitude towards PDA. Whereas many Americans shy away from any PDA, Germans PDA their way through the streets left and right, sometimes even right in front of your nose. Again, it is what it is. We also behave differently towards children. If children misbehave in public, everybody feels entitled to chastise that child, and maybe even their parents, because they should have told their child to stop the behavior. For example, a child that puts their shoes on the seat in a subway is likely to get yelled at by everybody around them if the parents fail to do so first. The next point I have mentioned before, but it doesn't hurt to state it again. All German prices always include VAT, so you pay what you see. You'll also find that most stores offer no self-service and require you to bag your items yourself. There are also no free bags. Another cultural difference extends to parking. In many German cities, the space is so limited that cars need to park halfway on the sidewalk. That might look criminal to you, but it is what you need to do as well if you want to park there. However, do not ever park on a bike trail, Fahrradweg. For that matter, also do not walk on one. I've mentioned it before, public drinking is allowed and therefore done all over Germany. Another substantial distinction between the US and Germany is their attitude towards outdoor life. When you visit Germany, you'll notice that Germans are flocking outside as soon as the sun comes out. Then you can see us sitting in cafes, parks, and even small green patches eating, drinking, playing games, and talking. The concept of no loitering is entirely foreign to us. The next big difference is our attitude towards money. We Germans love talking about money, but always in the sense of not having enough or tips and tricks on saving money. Even wealthy Germans complain about not having enough money and sharing their money-saving hacks proudly. Flaunting your wealth, however, is a no-no. We consider that conceited. Most of us are very frugal, and you'll find many a German pick up every cent from the street they can find. Whereas you can find many coins on US streets that every passerby ignores, most Germans would be glad to pick up every little cent. Therefore, a German will likely expect you to pay back a sum you borrowed, down to the cent. Again, if they tell you they don't believe them, we say what we mean. But if they don't say anything, expect them to want you to give them the correct amount. It is not uncommon that Germans transfer cent amounts from one account to another many times. And on the topic of money, cash is the way to go in Germany. Germans also often pay with debit cards, but they are not always accepted, and American debit cards often don't work in Germany. Your credit card is not going to get you far in Germany, I'm afraid. Bring that cash. We believe that nur Bares ist Wahres, only cash is truth. And lastly, the majority of German stores close on Sunday, so you want to do your shopping on Saturday instead. Lastly, let's talk about the no-nos in Germany. I've mentioned it before, but we really hate jaywalking. Don't do it while in Germany. The next point is a repeat as well. Don't talk loudly, live, or on the phone. That goes towards being respectful in shared common places. Americans usually make themselves known by talking obnoxiously loudly, at least from a German perspective. The next one only applies if you do speak German. If you speak German, it is crucial not to mix up du and sie. If you are neither friends with the German or they are a relative, stay far away from du in all its forms and only address them with sie. Addressing someone you shouldn't with du is an easy way to insult a German thoroughly. If you get invited to a German's house, make sure to ask after entering if you should take off your shoes. Most German households are shoe-free zones, and walking through them with shoes is a big no-no. You also want to know to never ever say happy birthday to a German before it's their birthday, because we believe that it brings bad luck. If you attempt to wish happy birthday to a German even an hour before the clock strikes 12, you will hear a very disturbed, no, don't say anything yet. The reasoning here is very sound. You don't want to jinx anything. You can't celebrate reaching a certain age if you haven't reached it yet. One of the deadly sins, at least from a German perspective, is being late. I know I've mentioned it before, but most of us really do get offended when someone is late, and late means that if you want to meet someone at 12:01 is late. Another fun fact is that you should be wary of making promises in the flow of small talk, like, let's do that again, or call me, if you don't mean it. When my spouse and I were saying goodbye to one of my friends, my American spouse said carelessly, as so many Americans do, "See you later." My friend and I both stopped in our tracks and, in length, discussed if that was possible before we were flying back to the US. And we both agreed we were too busy and it was better to acknowledge that and say goodbye now for real. My spouse was shook that A, we take these words so seriously, and B, rather acknowledged that we wouldn't meet again than having the pleasant "see you later" be our last words. That is a wrap on the German crash course. You made it! Yay! I am so proud of you. Now you are ready for your trip to Germany. If you got a taste for German now, check out our other classes. We have classes on many topics, for example, cases, sentence structures, and verbs. If you want to test your knowledge, feel free to take the final exam in the next section. This is completely voluntary. You don't have to do it, but it can't hurt to check out what you have learned. In any case, I wish you the best time in Germany. I hope you have lots of fun and great experiences. Gute Reise, and thank you.